Welcome to Paper Trail, where we make academic research accessible and engaging. Let's see what the evidence says. So imagine a government tries to ban a major social media platform, hoping to curb its influence or protect its citizens. What do you expect the outcome to be?
Intuitively, you might think usage would plummet, perhaps even vanish. The goal is often to reduce exposure to certain content or platforms.
Right. But what if that ban didn't just fail to reduce overall engagement, but actually pushed users towards less regulated, more opaque corners of the internet, creating a digital Wild West that was harder to monitor than before?
That's precisely the intriguing and somewhat alarming finding suggested by the analysis of Australia's social media experiment. The math indicates it wasn't just ineffective, it may have had some truly counterproductive effects.
This idea of a failed ban is pretty provocative. Can you set the stage? What exactly was Australia trying to achieve with this social media experiment as the paper frames it?
The paper looks at a period when Australia, like many nations, was grappling with the challenges posed by large social media platforms. While the specific details of the ban might refer to various forms of state intervention, be it content restrictions, data localization demands, or direct blocking, the overarching intent was clear: to exert more control over the digital information landscape. This typically stems from concerns over misinformation, foreign influence, public safety during crises, or even broader issues of national sovereignty in the digital realm. The aspiration was likely to either compel platforms to comply with local regulations or, failing that, to reduce their domestic reach.
So the goal wasn't necessarily to eliminate social media entirely, but to either rein it in or significantly curtail its problematic aspects.
Exactly. Think of it as an attempt to introduce friction into the system, hoping that this friction would lead to a change in user behavior or platform compliance. The experiment part of the title is key here, because any significant policy intervention like this can be viewed as a real-world test of state power against the decentralized nature of the internet.
And where does the math come into defining this failure? How do researchers even begin to quantify whether a ban has failed, especially when user behavior is so fluid online?
This is where the methodology becomes fascinating. When researchers talk about the math of a failed ban, they're referring to rigorous quantitative analysis. They'd typically look at various data points: internet traffic data, app usage statistics, VPN adoption rates, and potentially even sentiment analysis on remaining public forums. The failure isn't just measured by continued overall usage, but crucially by how and where that usage shifts. For example, if a ban on a mainstream platform leads to a surge in encrypted messaging app usage or traffic to less regulated international platforms, that's a measurable shift. The math would involve statistical modeling to isolate the effect of the ban from other confounding factors, essentially asking, did this specific policy intervention cause a statistically significant change in these measurable behaviors? And was that change in line with the policy's intent?
So it's like tracking water. You build a dam in one place, but the water doesn't just disappear. It finds new channels, new subterranean routes.
Precisely. And the math is about mapping those new routes, understanding their capacity, and determining if the new flow is more or less desirable than the original. It's an attempt to move beyond anecdotal evidence and provide empirical proof of the policy's real-world impact.
That brings the discussion to the core mechanism of this failure: circumvention. If a government tries to block access, what are the primary ways users get around it? Are we talking about a sophisticated cat-and-mouse game or more straightforward methods?
It's often a combination, but the primary method is usually quite straightforward for many users: virtual private networks, or VPNs. These tools encrypt internet traffic and route it through servers in other countries, effectively masking the user's location and making it appear as though they are accessing the internet from outside the banned region. For a significant portion of the tech-savvy population, VPNs are easily accessible and relatively inexpensive. Beyond VPNs, there's a phenomenon often called dark social: the shift to private messaging apps, closed groups, or even less mainstream international platforms that aren't subject to the domestic ban.
So the policy, in attempting to control the visible public squares of the internet, might inadvertently push conversations into these private, unindexed, and ultimately more difficult to monitor spaces.
Exactly. It's an unintended consequence that makes the original problem, whatever it was, misinformation, coordination of illicit activities, etc., potentially harder to address. Instead of content being on a platform that a government or even researchers could potentially engage with or study, it moves into spaces where it's much more opaque. It's like trying to regulate a public park by fencing it off, only to find everyone now gathers in unmarked alleyways and private basements.
That's a powerful analogy. Now, what about the information vacuum this creates? If a major platform is blocked or severely restricted, how does that impact the flow of legitimate information or even the spread of the very misinformation the ban might have aimed to combat?
This is a crucial point. Mainstream social media platforms, for all their faults, often serve as conduits for official announcements, news from established media organizations, and even public health information. When those channels are restricted, an information vacuum can form. In the absence of credible, easily accessible sources, people don't stop seeking information. They simply turn to alternatives. These alternatives might be less reliable, more partisan, or operate entirely outside the journalistic ethics of traditional media.
So, in trying to reduce exposure to harmful content, a ban could inadvertently leave people more susceptible to it by cutting them off from verified sources and pushing them towards echo chambers that thrive on less scrutiny.
Precisely. The math here might involve looking at the veracity of information circulating on alternative platforms or the spread of rumors during crises. The researchers would likely analyze how public discourse fragments and whether the overall information ecosystem becomes more polarized or less informed as a direct result of the policy. It's a complex dynamic because the intent might be to protect, but the outcome could be a less resilient, more vulnerable information environment.
Beyond the immediate impact on content and information, what are the broader economic and social ripples of such a policy? Are there measurable costs that extend beyond just user behavior?
Absolutely. The economic impacts can be significant. Many small businesses, content creators, and even larger enterprises rely heavily on social media platforms for marketing, customer engagement, and e-commerce. A ban or severe restriction can disrupt these economic activities, leading to revenue loss, job cuts, and reduced innovation in the digital economy. Think of the influencer economy, or local businesses that use social media for direct sales and promotions. They're cut off from their audience.
Socially, the ripple effects are also substantial. Social media, despite its flaws, is a primary means of communication for many, especially across geographical distances. It connects families, builds communities around shared interests, and facilitates activism, whether for social good or otherwise. It sounds like the policymakers might have focused on a very specific problem, but without fully appreciating the interconnectedness of these platforms with daily life and the broader economy.
That's a common trap in policymaking, particularly with complex digital ecosystems. The paper's analysis would aim to quantify these wider costs, perhaps looking at changes in economic indicators for affected sectors, or even proxies for social capital or community engagement. It's an attempt to provide a more holistic cost-benefit analysis that often goes overlooked when focusing purely on the initial problem the ban sought to address.
This leads to the big picture. What are the lessons here for future attempts at digital governance, not just in Australia, but globally? If a ban can be so easily circumvented and have these unintended consequences, what options are left for governments trying to manage the digital sphere?
The primary lesson seems to be that outright bans are often blunt instruments in a very nuanced digital world. They tend to be ineffective at truly curbing usage and are prone to creating a host of secondary problems that can be worse than the original issue. The math suggests that user demand for these services is incredibly resilient. Instead of attempting to block access, which is technically difficult and socially disruptive, the research implies that more sophisticated, targeted approaches are needed.
More sophisticated meaning what? Rather than building a wall, perhaps building smarter filtering mechanisms or investing in digital literacy?
Exactly.
It points toward strategies like robust digital literacy programs to help citizens critically evaluate information rather than simply shielding them from it. It also suggests working with platforms on content moderation policies that align with national values, rather than trying to wall them off entirely. Furthermore, it implies a need for regulation that focuses on data privacy, algorithmic transparency, and platform accountability, rather than on outright censorship or blocking. The paper implicitly argues for understanding the incentives and behaviors of users and platforms and designing policies that nudge those behaviors in desired directions, rather than trying to dictate them. It's about designing policy for a complex adaptive system rather than treating it like a simple switch.
So, what are the key takeaways from this Australian experiment that listeners should really ponder?
First, internet bans are not simply ineffective, they often lead to predictable and measurable circumvention, primarily through tools like VPNs, pushing users into less regulated spaces.
Second, these bans can create significant information vacuums, potentially making populations more vulnerable to the very misinformation they were designed to combat by cutting off access to verified sources.
And third, the economic and social costs extend far beyond just platform usage, impacting local businesses, community cohesion, and overall digital development.
And third, the fundamental lesson here is about the incredible resilience of online demand. People will find a way to connect and access information.
That resilience is exactly what the math underscores. It highlights the difficulty of imposing top-down control on a decentralized network without incurring significant, often negative externalities.
Given this, what does this case study suggest about the future of digital sovereignty for nations around the world? How can governments balance control with the inherent openness of the internet without repeating similar failed experiments? That wraps up this episode of Paper Trail. Join us next time as we dig into more research worth talking about. If you liked what you heard, share it with a friend.
Keep reading the fine print.